Hello and welcome. Thank you for watching our presentation today. The law offices of McLaughlin and Associates and McLaughlin Mediation and Consulting focus on helping small to mid-sized businesses grow and thrive. You started your business because of your passion. Let us help you with that vision. We offer a variety of legal and human resources services. Check out our website for more details at www.ma-lawpc.com. And now, on to our presentation.
Okay, so the next one is, don't you like my little piggy thing? All right, so the show me the money. Now, thank me later for not having Jerry Maguire. I was so close and I said, that is so corny, I will not do Jerry Maguire. But I was tempted, but I did not. Okay, so I have this broken down in this. This is, again, a big deal. So there's two sides of this. There's the side in the contract. We're talking about the contract side of it, what should be in your agreement. But then it kind of flows the other way, which is where the liability is. So the first has to do with your financial responsibilities to this first group, your vendors, leases, suppliers, labor, and the accountability. So inside of the agreements themselves, you don't have to have like pages upon pages upon pages about these, but you have to say who's responsible. So for example, who's going to deal with the leases? Who's going to deal with the vendors? Who's going to be responsible for suppliers? Who's going to be responsible for labor? Now we're talking about the lower level. Who's going to be responsible for the issue when someone comes and says, I didn't get paid enough, or there's disputes and all those types of things. And then what about the accountability between yourselves on those types of things? So a big issue that comes up is one person's handling the books and the other one is not, and they freeze out the one who's not handling the books. Oh, well, you don't need to do this, you've never known it. And they violate the law all the time, but until you sue, what does it matter? But this way, if you at least spell it out, and by default, a lot of the operating agreements will say this, but it'll effectively say, I have a right to see the books on this frequency in this manner, and if you don't, you violated the agreement. So when I sue, if I sue somebody for a breach, I'll go into the operating agreement. I'll say the operating agreement required you to account to me on this basis. By freezing me out, meaning the client, I no longer can do anything. And so therefore you've caused, now I have damages as a result of that. The second is your banks. So someone has to be responsible for those areas, loans, your debt equity, your books, personal guarantees, and the personal collateral. I'm not talking about business collateral. I mean like the homes and that. What I mean by responsibility? It's not enough to just have boilerplate that says that somebody is going to be responsible for those categories. Because the bank is going to send you the documents, right? You don't have to do anything. They're just going to send it. I mean somebody's got to know what they're doing. I had a situation with my former partnership where we had bought a building. And we had a long-standing business relationship, and we were supposed to get breaks. So if you're familiar with commercial loans, usually if you terminate early, there's a penalty to that. And we had negotiated those down. So we get the documents from the bank, and my other partners are like, oh, no, it's good. Now, they're all attorneys, but they're like, what's the big deal? So I read there, and I'm reading the fine print, and I said, are you aware what this says? And it had been processed wrong. It had just been defaulted. And I said, this doesn't say what you think it does. And literally, earlier in the day, they're like, why you got to be such a stickler? Later in the day, they're like, oh, thank you. So my point being is that it's not enough to just kind of passively take this stuff and sign on the dotted line. Getting back to the issue we said earlier about like the PPP loans and stuff like that, someone inside needs to kind of pay attention to those types of things. And I mean, I can't tell you the amount of work that Carrie did when we were dealing with PPP, just putting documents together and all those types of things. At the end of the day, when there was questions being asked, as everybody has some kind of audit, especially when you're going to forgiveness, someone needs to know what they were doing, right? If you don't spell out those responsibilities, it's a lot of this. And it looks bad from a banking side, right? They're going to be like, who's responsible? Well, we don't know. Oh, guess what? You don't get any more credit, so that's a problem. And then down on the bottom, that's a big one as well, is your capital contributions and your reserves. So who's going to put in personal cash? What cash reserves are going to be withheld before you pay out your profits? Who's going to deal with the technology if you split, and how are you going to deal with sweat equity, okay? So I want to just take a moment with those four things. Big fight is this: when companies go down, they go south, someone has to infuse cash. No one wants to infuse cash in a failing company, okay? You have to spell out in the agreement how you're going to deal with the cash and what happens to the interest. So you can either do it by a loan basis where someone will, for example, the other side will give money and then it converts to a loan inside of the business. So I put $100,000 in, suddenly now I get that $100,000 back at the end with 6% interest. Or what it does is it will dilute the interest that you have in a company. So we're 50-50, now I've infused $100,000 in, well now your interest is only 45%, for example. It has to be built into it. That's a big deal because the person putting in cash then can control the company, which at the end of the day is really what the person wants. Having the discussion up front makes things easier when you have to do it later on, because when you say, I'm going to give cash only if I get more interest, you know what the answer is going to be? No. And you're going to be in deadlock, which is something we'll talk about in a little bit, which is you're going to be at loggerhead and you won't be able to do anything about it, okay? Technology is the same deal. What happens if you want to go your merry way? One person brought in the technology, the other person is the one who is the dollars. So what's going to happen with the technology, right? So now the company owns it. The person with the cash won't put in the cash. So who's going to own the technology? Nowhere. If a lot of technology is time sensitive, if you're getting embroiled in a fight for a year, you could have lost your edge. And so that's, spelling it out, like if we get a fight, I keep the technology. And I had a situation years back where there was a guy in good faith, went into business, he had developed a really cool engine, and he had an investor who came in and offered a lot of money. And almost immediately, they disagreed about how to market. And so it gets back to the other piece. One wanted to market up here, the money. The other one wanted to market down here because he was in the field. He was like, I want to go to trade shows, this is the way we're going to do it. And they couldn't agree on things, and they didn't want to put this kind of money in, but the technology was everything. And what happened is he didn't have the money to go forward with the technology, and once that happened, it shut everything down. There were big deals, big deals where that technology would have been purchased, but they were lost. They were lost because they couldn't freely give the technology until it all got resolved. So it did go to a lawsuit, and it didn't turn out very well, okay? Sweat equity, the same thing. The person who's doing all the work, I'm doing all the work all the time, I'm working 90 hours a week, okay? Restaurant example would be a perfect one, right? I'm always in there, you're sitting back and you're raking in all the cash. Yeah, but I'm 50-50, okay? Unless you spelled out the importance of sweat equity, it's worth zero. It's of course you put in the money because that's what it means to run a business. So again, those are the types of things you want to spell out. On the technology side, this is the top one. Again, I just kind of touched on it. That's a big deal, is to make sure that you have spelled out exactly how the technology is going to be done. I put the general know-how in the middle there. Spell out what's actual general know-how and what's proprietary. So if you read a generic clause in an agreement, it will talk about confidential information, and it will have this like laundry list of things that includes customers and technology and all that stuff. But what's proprietary is not what's generally known. So two things. One is if I come from an industry and I have a lot of information, but I provided a very specific piece of technology, my know-how that went into that, I get to go and leave with that. But if I don't spell that out properly, what will happen is I'll be accused of violating trade secrets. Oh, you went to the competitor and now you're using all this information we developed on the inside outside. And you know what? Half the time it's actually going to go against you because it's not going to be clear, okay? And so spelling out exactly what it is, the intellectual property and the technology is important. Same thing happens with things like trademarks and logos, right? The types of this marketing that you have, who owns the marketing? You both do. And you've spent thousands upon thousands of dollars on a website and all this marketing, and you want to take it, but no one wants to give it up. Now it's all gone. So deciding what that is. Your customers, obviously, you want to make sure that you decide, on the non-solicit, the key part with that is that there is a level of competition when you split, but spelling out how you're going to deal with the customers and how you're going to deal with the revenue is the key thing on the non-competes. It's not that you keep somebody out of the industry, but rather if we're going to both go, especially if you're in the same industry, how are we going to deal with that? Maybe one person goes commercial, one person goes, retail, that type of a thing. You have your customers. If that's not dealt with, you're going to lose the customers right away. The work sold. How many times have partners wanted to split and they decide, oh, well, you know what? I'm not going to do the work anymore on it. Well, I'm not going to do the work on it anymore. Well, wait a minute, I just brought in this big project. I'm owed this money from that. And then the other person's like, well, no, you didn't. I was doing all the stuff in the field, and you can't agree on it. And again, the customer's going to decide it for you because they're going to walk. Okay, so but if you can spell out, if we split, here's how we'll handle the revenue. Something as simple as, for the first 6 months, we will split up the revenues equally on this. After that, we're free to take them. Sometimes something as simple as that will fix things, right? But not after the fact. No one's going to agree. Service work and warranties. Okay, so the companies are responsible for the warranty work, and they are responsible for the service work. If you shut down a company, now you're in breach of those issues with your companies. And we personally experienced that with a contractor that shut down and didn't honor the warranties. The problem with that is that if you have one of the members who wants to stay in the industry and it's found out that they breached the warranty or that they didn't honor service work, they're not going to get any future work. So it's not enough just to say we're going to go our merry ways. You have to think about how we're going to handle those future things. If it's tied in with distributor, if you're a distributor for a certain manufacturer, finding out beforehand what is that required, especially when you actually become the exclusive distributor, say, hey, if we ever split, what's that going to happen? People are afraid to say that because they're like, I don't want to let them think we're going to split, but quite the opposite is actually proactive. You're telling them that, look, we want to make sure that we take care of everything, okay? And then the bottom on the location, that's what I got back before about the lease. Many times people don't think about the lease. Personal guarantees are tied to that. You can't just walk away from a lease because they're going to come after you personally. And it's also an issue when the property is owned by one or the other, or it's owned by an entity in which you're both in there. So imagine if you have a corporation where you own the business, and then you have an LLC that owns the real estate, and now you can't agree, and it just kind of sits there. So spelling out what's going to happen in the event of a split, that's all contractual. And then, the issue about equipment and tools. I'm not talking about like a tool belt. I'm talking about huge pieces of machinery. What happens to those? Even in things like medical practice, what happens to our MRI machines? What, you think about, a print shop. What happens with all that? Is it going to sit there? And then it ties into the lease. Well, if you've tied up all of your equipment, if there's a security interest by the landlord against all that equipment, or the bank has a security interest, the new business, even if one person wants to continue, they may not even be able to do anything with that equipment, and it's going to sit there. And that's the kind of thing that could have been spelled out in the beginning, that if we split, here's what we'll do with the equipment. And that's a very frequent problem that I run into. And they're like, well, can't we just sue each other? Yeah, you can sue each other, but you didn't spell out what that means. All they're going to do is liquidate your equipment, and you don't want it to liquidate. Well, it cost me so much to replace it. Yes, I know that, but it's going to get auctioned, okay?
Thank you again for watching this informative session. If you have any questions about what you just heard, or want to contact us for legal or business consulting services, you can reach us at 630-230-8434 or email us at kmclaughlin@ma-lawpc.com. Have a wonderful day.